What is up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back to Checkmate Gaming. I'm Hold Shift. We've got a little bit of a different episode coming through for you guys as we're talking about some of the more possibly dramatic changes to happen, not just in the playable rosters, but also in the coaching staffs of a couple of things that have happened since CDL Florida has come to a conclusion. As you know from the title, the thumbnail, and I'm sure this little intro spiel, the two things we'll be talking about in this video is number one, the most recent thing to be confirmed, that, well, the OpTic Gaming will no longer be needing the services of Pacman as their coach. This comes as a pretty stark surprise, I think, to a lot of people, simply due to the fact that OpTic just made a grand finals, and they played pretty darn well in there. So what exactly spurred this change? We could stipulate and speculate all we want. That's not really what this channel is geared for, though. So, taking a look at what Pacman had to say specifically, this will give us a little bit of some sort of insight as far as what may have gone on behind the scenes. Who knows? We don't really 100% know. But Pacman, through his tweet, said, "I am no longer a part of OpTic Gaming. I'll miss being with the team on a daily basis, but my time here has come to an end. I've spent the last decade of my life in Call of Duty, and will be looking for the next opportunity that arises for me in COD esports. Thank you, Heart." Here's the thing. We have to love Pacman. Again, he's a brilliant mind for the game. I know there was controversy about him last year. Some people didn't like him on the desk. I personally loved him on the desk. He brings a lot of value to anything that he touches when it comes to Call of Duty esports, and it does seem like a bit of a surprise to see this happen so quickly. As we take a look, again, Chino was in the mix of this roster. He's the new addition. He played very, very well throughout the entirety of the weekend of the Florida home series. But let's take a look just quickly at where OpTic Gaming currently stand in their overall kind of differentials, scores, win-loss ratios, and overall rankings when it comes to each of these modes. As a full, 50 points. They're 5-9 in total with a map count of 24 and 31. And the 50 points actually puts them right in the mix of potentially being a major threat. They're currently tied with the London Royal Ravens, and the next closest beyond them is just the Paris Legion. That would allow them to break into the top 6. Potential for the top 5 if they have one more good weekend beyond this, which, again, very well could happen in the most upcoming weekend of the Seattle home series that's coming up. But take a look at where they currently are in overall rankings. You see the numbers that pop up: 9th in hardpoint with a -9 differential, 8th in search at a -0.11 differential, if you want to consider that even a differential at all, and then 9th again in the domination with a +10 point differential. But even though those numbers don't sound great, here's where they were just a week previous to them playing at Florida. They were 10th in hardpoint with a -14 point differential, 11th in search with a almost full round differential, and they were still 9th in domination, but at a slightly less differential of only a 6-point positive. You take a look back to what OpTic Gaming was able to do in their run at Florida. It did not start off on the right foot. That Game 5 versus London would definitely hurt a touch, especially considering the fact that they dropped both hard points. And I put so much emphasis on that because the only other hard point they dropped in the weekend was in the grand finals versus the Atlanta FaZe, of which they kept it close all the way through on that St. Petro hard point map number 4. So if they start off at a better footing against London, this could have been a clean run through the winner's bracket for OpTic Gaming LA. But even still, that all said, they still have a way to beat through Paris 3-0, London again 3-0, and then they outlasted Toronto Ultra in 5 in the semifinals. Again, they did not drop a single hard point through the mix, but more importantly, they only dropped one search and destroy map, and they only dropped one domination. The domination that they dropped was a 1-point margin. It was the 141 to 142 where they nearly came back against Toronto. The only other dom loss they had in the weekend was versus the Atlanta FaZe, where they lost by a more convincing margin of about 20 points. So OpTic is definitely finding some favor. So why drop Pacman now? There have obviously been some cause for concern for this team really since the start of this season. But things have been getting better over the last 2 weeks. Specifically, when they were at Chicago, they did play relatively well in the domination. And even just before that, when you went back to LA, their domination has actually been one of their strongest modes in whole. Even though they only took a couple of them away, the losses were very narrow losses. A 150-155 to the Dallas Empire in the Chicago home series, and they blew the LA Gorillas out on the domination specifically. But Most importantly, it's their hardpoint that's been getting so much better. They didn't win a single hardpoint map at Chicago. Now they come through with only dropping 3. It's not bad at all, and especially considering that the fact that you played Atlanta to only about a 20-point margin. That's very impressive. But what I'm getting back to in my initial point is, simple fact, OpTic's been considering changes for a while. This was not a surprise to anybody. We knew this going through the first couple of weeks when they really weren't playing well at all, and they were forced to play well at LA, where, yeah, they did have a good comeback reverse sweep versus LAG, and they smoked the Minnesota Rocker. But beyond that, it's still been a lot of question marks of what is it going to take to get this team moving. And it never was a sum of all the parts. It was a couple of individual things, and then how do you get that puzzle put together? And so maybe there's some consideration that Pacman wasn't the guy to really bring those pieces together. Who knows how much influence Mud Dog had in this last week and a half, knowing that Chino was going to be taking J-Cap's spot. That's kind of my consideration, that maybe they kind of put Pacman in the backseat for this week. Just let's see how things go. We'll let Chino play. Let's not overcoach him. Let's see how things move. And obviously there's a flow built in this team that's moving in a positive direction. So what do you do now if you're OpTic Gaming LA? You don't really have a true coach. You got Mud Dog, who's still running the esports operations at OpTic, but is he really coaching that team? We don't know. There's not a lot that we do know about what's going on behind the scenes of the management department at OpTic. But what we do know, Pacman will no longer be there. He is obviously entertaining all opportunities that could potentially be out there. I know Clayster in those string of tweets did kind of put out the fact that the Dallas Empire are looking for an analyst if he'd be interested in that. But I imagine that Pacman will find a home somewhere, whether it is behind an esports organization or potentially as an analyst joining the desk again. I would be definitely excited to see that was going to be the case. Don't know if that's even an opportunity for that, but I think all things are open for opportunity for Pacman going forward. But this OpTic Gaming team, again, you take a look at what they've been able to do and where they're going to be going from here. Again, they will be at Seattle coming up again very, very soon, whereof which they will be in a pool where they play Minnesota first round out, and then they have Paris and Chicago in the mix. So again, you take a look at some of those win-loss ratios. Yes, you have beat the Minnesota Rocker 3-0 once before. You split 2 series with the Paris Legion, and then Chicago got the better of you. But again, that was a while ago. That was during the Minnesota home series that we saw that matchup happen. So a lot has changed for both of those teams. And what a segue that is, because the next team we're talking about are the Chicago Huntsmen. Again, I think you probably did see it. I kind of threw it in as a one-liner during our power rankings, or during one of our recap days, or rather I should say, from Florida, saying that Prestinni was no longer an option for Florida, as he's going to be likely picked up by Chicago. Last I heard, it was pending league approval, but that is going to be the first major roster move I think we're going to see so far in this CDL franchise history. And let's take a look just at Chicago of what they've been able to do, or maybe what they've not been able to do over the last couple of weeks. Ranking-wise, they still look very solid. Second now across the board in each of the modes, with positive differentials everywhere, although they are marginal. And more importantly, those differentials have faded a touch since we saw them play at Dallas specifically, where they did eventually lose to the Florida Mutineers. But I think there is some concern here for Chicago generally. Obviously, saying the word generally, General has been filling in for Gunless, who's been riding the pine over the last week or so. So what does Prestinni bring to the mix? That's the real question here. This is a Chicago Huntsmen team that at one point in time was extremely dominant in not just the domination, but also the search and destroy. Going all the way through the CDL live events in Atlanta, they had only dropped 2 domination maps and 3 search and destroy maps. Outside of that, they dropped 5 hardpoint maps, but that is an incredible statistic. Since that point, over the course of 2 home series, they've dropped 3 of their dominations, essentially going 50-50 on them. They've held a 4-3 record there. And then in Search and Destroy, they've dropped 4. Hardpoint has not been any better, as they've gone nearly 1-1 all the way through, with the exception of the time that they played the London Royal Ravens at the Chicago home series, where they took both of those hardpoint maps, but both of them were within 15 points. So again, there hasn't really been a convincing win for Chicago in some time. The last they had a convincing map win-loss ratio was versus the Minnesota Rocker, where it was a 3-0, but that was a 250-239 hardpoint on Ramaza, a 6-5 search and destroy on Petro, and a 150-143 win on Gunrunner Dom. Everything else has either been a loss, a map 5, or a very tight 4-game series. So Chicago obviously are recognizing here that even though the ship is not necessarily sinking, there are a couple of holes that need to be plugged up. And if they're going to continue along this same path, maybe Gunless isn't the best option for them. We've seen them kind of play around with different roles between RCDs and Formal. Scump has been needing some help up front as he continues to commit to engagements that he's not really finding as much value with because he's usually off on an island. Envoy's doing what he can to keep up, but they really do need a very fast-paced SMG, you kind of feel, getting into the mix, and Gunless just is not that guy. But I still think you have to consider the question, is Prestinni necessarily the answer? He's finding a pretty good amount of kills per minute, as we saw from EasyMax's stat sheet. He also finds a lot of engagements per minute. Even though he doesn't necessarily boast the best records in hardpoint or search and destroy, his domination totals are actually pretty favorable, as he's done very well in that mode and has really kind of ruled the land when he was playing with Florida previously. So, my biggest takeaway, why Prestinni could potentially help Chicago? Scump and Envoy need to get more active, and Gunless playing a little bit more on the passive side has not really allowed them to do that. So now you've got the opportunity to run 3 hardcore SMGs with Prestinni in the mix. The only thing that I worry about is when you need that third AR, who's going to pick it up? Because Gunless was the guy that was picking up that third AR and usually does relatively well with it when Formal and RCDs need the help on either Search or Azir Cave. My biggest question is, now that you've got this in the mix, who's going to pick up that third M4? Are they? I mean, this used to be a map mode combo of Azir Cave Hardpoint that Chicago ruled with. They're 5-1 on the map mode as a whole. But now they don't have that third AR. Are you going to get outpaced, or are you going to try to change the meta by running 3 SMGs? I have a hard time finding it palpable that you're going to see Scump or Envoy rock an AR. I don't see a world where Prestinni's going to pick up an M4. So I feel like they're going to be a little bit more weakened when it comes to that Azir Cave initially, as well as potentially their search and destroy initially, because they might not have that go-to third AR, which Gunless has been positive with. It's just the SMG engagements that I really felt like Chicago was hurting in, and that's why you see so many close respawn totals or blowouts against them, while they still have been relatively successful kind of in search and destroy. I don't think that this trade, if it were to happen, or this buyout, if it were to happen, will instantly make Chicago a top 2 team again. There are going to be some extra concerns just bringing Prestinni back in the mix, mostly in who's going to run what roles, and especially what those roles are going to look like when it comes down to those 3 AR-styled maps, whether it's Search or the Azir Cave Hardpoint. But let's talk about Florida for a second. Now that they've lost Prestinni, there is nothing to indicate that Gunless will be a flat-for-flat trade. I don't know if Gunless is just going to go straight to Florida. I have heard nothing about anything like that. I would be surprised to see just a flat 1-for-1 trade. So as we take a look at Florida, this last weekend was extremely punishing to them. You take a look at where they currently stand in rankings and scores. They are still okay at the respawn, 5th in hardpoint, 5th in domination, positive differentials there, but if you were just to consider where they were previous to this weekend, they were a team that was 4th in hardpoint with a +7 differential. Now that's 5th with +3. In search, they were 8th at -0.75 rounds on average. Now they're 11th at 0.91 down, which is not a good differential. And then the most drastic one is the 3rd place ranking from Dom at +11 down to 5th place in Dom at just +7. Again, that doesn't sound like much, but over the course of just 2 games, that's a pretty dramatic fall for these guys. And really, again, there were some tight games that were in the mix when they both played Minnesota and New York, but dropping 0-6 in the maps is definitely going to hurt the morale a touch. I don't feel necessarily that Florida is in as bad of a position as a lot of people are making them out to be. Yeah, you're losing Prestinni, but it didn't really look like he was going to come back into the starting roster anyways. And again, those 6 losses, 210 to 250, 194 to 250, both the hard points. 5-6 round 11 versus New York in one of the searches, and then a 154-162 near loss on Hackney Yard Dom to Minnesota. They did drop the search to Minnesota dramatically at 2-6, and they dropped the domination to New York pretty dramatically at 143-177. So I don't necessarily think that you're going to be sitting here and say that Florida's going to be severely hindered by this move, and I don't think at the same point that you're going to sit there as a Chicago fan and say that Prestinni into the mix is instantly going to alleviate any of the problems we were starting to see crop up just because Gunless is being benched. Again, I still feel like someone like General might actually fit the mold better than Prestinni would. He's got a guy that he looked very good in scrims with the SMG, and beyond that, he's a dedicated AR player in his history. That's what you need. You need a third AR, third SMG to be filled in for, and I just don't know if Prestinni brings that to the mix. What he does bring, though, is more engagements, more kills per minute, and that's going to allow Scump and Envoy to also try to play at a faster tempo, which Chicago has lacked in pretty considerably over the last few weeks. That's my thoughts. I want to hear yours. Get in the comments section down below. Let me know what you think about the move potentially of Prestinni getting to Chicago, and more importantly, what does this mean for OpTic now that Pacman is no longer behind the helm? Are they going to bring somebody else in? Are they fine without a coach? I would be hesitant to say that, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. And while you're on your way out of the video, make sure you subscribe, ring the notification bell. And until the next one, hope you guys keep holding it down. So long.